The evening we should relax. Not my suggestion. One of today's students suggested that we should go easy because it is traditional Friday night viewing night. So I thought I would also hang on to the pleasure principle and to aim you with a general and not particularly focused discourse about the relationships of music and image. I don't ever think there was such a thing as silent cinema. That's a journalistic misnomer. I think ever since Méliès and Lumière, there always has been an association. The most familiar one, of course, is that piano that never stops when the filmmaking continues. But I suppose even the sound of people in a John Cagean way, or the sound of the seats tipping up as people left the audience, would constitute some sort of music, certainly a soundtrack. And I suppose that there has traditionally been presumed that this relationship between music and film, if it is abandoned, somehow impoverishes the product. I would often go along with that. Though, of course, there are many filmmakers who make films without musical soundtracks. Maybe to my subsequent regret, I tried it with the last product we made, a film which was a homage to Fellini called 8.5 Women. I set myself 3 targets to do in this film to try to move into new areas of vocabulary which I hadn't used before. The first one was to concern myself much more with close-ups. Essentially, I'm a widescreen picture maker rather than somebody who's interested in that notion of the glance, which is supposed to be the only thing that cinema really has ever invented. Second, to become involved with a whole series of convoluted literary dialogue, which I enjoy. And the third thing was to make a film without a musical soundtrack. I think probably I should have done none of those things, but it was important for me, since we were talking about successful failures last night, to have gone down that alley, to have gone down that cul-de-sac. So, the relationship of music to image. If I have a concern here, an irritation, is that most relationships between music and image in the soundtrack are very poorly understood, very poorly demonstrated, and it is a rare film indeed that tries to find a perfect symbiosis where one of the creators, either the composer or the filmmaker, does not dominate. There is a very famous example, is Prokofiev and Eisenstein working on Alexander Nevsky. Mary Seaton talks endlessly about this relationship. I'm not certain how apocryphal it is and how much is determined by hindsight. But certainly Prokofiev and Eisenstein sat down endlessly to discuss potential of the ways in which moving image and sound, music, worked. And before either the composer wrote a note, or indeed before Eisenstein turned a frame, they developed systems, and the result was that film called Alexander Nevsky. When I came out of art school, Michael Nyman, English composer, was coming out of the music school. A serendipitous meeting, entirely fortuitous. We talked endlessly theory about the relationships of film and music, and there were lots of filming essays which never got anywhere, but finally we collaborated on a film called The Draftsman's Contract. It was, I think, the calling card for both of us, and we subsequently made about 40 films together before parting and going our separate ways. So just as a general indication of the relationships, I believe, satisfactory relationships between music and image, let me show you, if we are ready with the projector, a clip. We have been discussing this film in general, but here is a clip we did not discuss. So maybe see the first one. I'm now responsible for the lights, so if you're ready. Not quite. Well.
The house will be kept clear of members of the household servants, horses and...
Could we put this next film, please? I was quite academically concerned with 17th and 18th century music, English music, and Purcell was at the centre of that study. But of course, he was also a pupil of Steve Reich and Phil Glass, the minimalists of the late 1960s, early 1970s. So that particular combination of the use of themes and ideas from an English lyrical tradition, overloaded, if you like, by sampling and minimalism, created the particular ambiences that were necessary for here. There always is subsequently an argument, did or was the picture dictated by the music, or indeed did it work around the other way around? Michael Nyman's music is of such a fashion, it can be cut and organized in such a way, almost like lengths of picture. I think that was one of the ways in which both he and I were fascinated by all those post-John Cagean serial techniques, the ability to both cut the music in the same way that you could cut the picture. So I think we were, for a time, very much suited to make collaborations. Often my subject matter was extremely melodramatic, if always looked at from a somewhat cerebral, distant point of view. But there was always, and this is very difficult in music, an ability by Michael Nyman to create a sense of irony. Music as irony. Okay, there are people, of course, Satie's the supreme example. With that ability, and I also suppose due to the particular juxtaposition of image to sound, which often counterpointed and did not simply underscore the identity, the event, the ambience that was necessary. You know how basically music is organized in the orthodox film industry. A composer, I wouldn't even call him a composer, but a man or indeed a woman who writes music is told to give 35 seconds of misery, 42 seconds of suspense. Find me a musical equivalent of that door slam, that baby crying. So on the one hand, it is very, very tyrannical and slavish, and on the other hand, often becomes extremely shallow and superficial, and almost a form of onomatopoeia and not much else. And it was one of the essential tenets of our relationship that I would, or we would together indicate structures, and then Michael should be allowed to go away and do what a composer does, which is develop musical themes, organize his orchestration, completely free in the sense of having to make it in any way, quote unquote, illustrate a picture. And also part of that situation, part of that contract, if you like, was for him to give me the finished music and then allow me to remanipulate it, either take it back into a music studio or indeed, quite harshly, put my scissors in and really chop it up. Music in those days was on magnetic tape. Magnetic tape is structured exactly like celluloid film, so just as you can cut the picture, so you can cut the music. And I think for a certain amount of activity, those sorts of relationships work. You need a lot of patience, not only for yourself, but also your production company and everybody else. We spent a long, long time editing this film, and I think it really has benefited from that, because the particular association of how the cuts work, how the ambiences work, how the color schemes work in association with the color and timbre of the music worked extremely well. And I don't think subsequent to that, we either had the most advantageous situation, the money, or indeed the time, or indeed the producer's sympathy to spend so long. I think we made a lot of very interesting collaborations, but maybe this was our most successful. I have other examples here. In fact, I have 5 or 6 examples, and I only have about an hour and a half if you have time to speak, so I must speed on. So what I want to show you is all sorts of different types of collaborations, and to demonstrate to you certainly the huge potential, which I think is very largely undersung and underused in the orthodox cinema that we basically have. Before I show you the next episode, let me say that Cecil B. DeMille has gone on record of saying that if you hear the music in a film, that music has failed. Poppycock, rubbish. I want to make sure you hear the music, you listen to the music, you understand how the music's organized. Music is not there for decoration, for a sidebar show. It's there to structure and organize and give you those extra layers of meaning and significance.